Dean Martin was doing what he did best, making an audience forget their troubles through the magic of song and charm. 3 numbers into his performance, the energy in the room shifted. Through the main entrance strode a figure whose presence changed the temperature of any space he entered. Anthony Castiano, known throughout the underworld as Big Tony, commanded respect through fear. This wasn't some low-level enforcer or street soldier. This was a made man, a captain in one of New York's most powerful crime families, with financial interests woven through practically every gambling establishment on the Strip. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, volatile, unpredictable, and absolutely not to be crossed. Tonight, Big Tony arrived already 3 sheets to the wind, his movements exaggerated, his voice carrying across the room with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He wanted attention, craved it like oxygen, and he'd come to the right place to get it. Dean was mid-ballad, his smooth voice wrapping around the melody like silk, when Big Tony's interruption shattered the moment. "Hey, crooner, give us something that doesn't put us to sleep. I've got a dead grandmother who could deliver more energy than this." Nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, the kind of uncomfortable laughter that happens when people don't know whether they're witnessing entertainment or the prelude to violence. Dean, however, didn't miss a beat. With the timing of a seasoned professional, he responded, "Well, friend, if your grandmother performs half as impressively as your entrance tonight, I'd pay good money for a front row seat." The laughter this time was genuine, the tension broken. Dean had done what great performers do. He'd acknowledged the disruption, diffused it with humor, and moved forward. The show continued. 20 minutes passed. Dean had transitioned from music to storytelling, sharing a memory from his childhood in Steubenville, Ohio. He spoke of his mother, Angela, an immigrant woman who'd taught her son fundamental truths about treating people with kindness, about maintaining dignity regardless of circumstances, about respecting others even when the world didn't respect you. The audience was captivated by this glimpse into the personal life of the famous entertainer, connecting with the humanity behind the celebrity. That's when Big Tony decided he hadn't received enough attention yet. Rising from his seat with theatrical dramatics, his voice boomed across the hushed showroom. "So Mama Martin taught you about good manners, huh? Too bad she forgot to teach you how this town actually operates." The effect was instantaneous and electric. Every person in that room understood the magnitude of what had just occurred. This wasn't heckling anymore. This was a direct attack on Dean's deceased mother, a woman who couldn't defend herself, whose memory was sacred to her son. In the cultural framework Dean came from, in the Italian-American world they both inhabited, this wasn't just rude, this was warfare. The band fell silent mid-note. The spotlight operator's beam wavered uncertainly. Waitresses froze mid-step. Every breath in that showroom was held because everyone understood the impossible position Dean Martin now occupied. He could pretend he didn't hear it and look weak, losing the respect of everyone watching, or he could respond with equal aggression and potentially ignite a conflict with a man who had the connections to destroy his Las Vegas career before morning. Dean stood motionless at the microphone. His famous easy smile had vanished, but fury hadn't replaced it. His expression was something else entirely, thoughtful, contemplative, almost serene. He drew a deliberate breath, and when words finally came, they emerged quietly yet somehow reached every corner of that vast space. "Sir, I genuinely appreciate you mentioning my mother," Dean began, his voice carrying a weight that silence amplified, "because she perfectly illustrates the exact point I was trying to make." Big Tony's lips curved into a smirk. His associates chuckled, believing their boss had won this confrontation. They had no idea what was coming. "My mother arrived in America from Italy at 17 years old," Dean continued, his delivery unhurried and deliberate. "She possessed exactly 3 things: the clothes she wore, hope for a better future, and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. No English language skills, no financial resources, no connections, just character." The room had gone from silent to something beyond silent, a kind of collective holding of breath where even thoughts seemed too loud. "And here's what she understood, what she taught me from the time I could understand words," Dean said. "The way you treat people when you hold power over them reveals everything about your true nature. Not what you say about yourself, not the reputation you've built, but how you act when someone can't fight back. That shows who you really are. Dean's eyes never left Big Tony. The mobster's smirk was faltering now, uncertainty creeping into his features. My mother spent years cleaning the homes of wealthy families, Dean went on. She got on her knees to scrub their floors. She washed clothes until her hands cracked and bled. She cooked elaborate meals she couldn't afford to make for her own children. And she encountered two types of people in those houses. He paused, letting the moment breathe. Some treated her like a human being. They said please and thank you. They acknowledged her effort, her humanity, her dignity. They understood that working with your hands to feed your family deserves respect, not contempt. Another pause, longer this time, but others, Dean's voice grew softer, but somehow more penetrating. Others treated her like furniture, like she was invisible, like poverty and physical labor meant she wasn't worth basic human consideration. Big Tony's face had gone from confident to uncertain to something approaching comprehension. You know what my mother told me about those people? Dean asked. She said, Dano, people who need power to feel strong are the weakest souls alive. They have to make others feel small because that's the only way they know how to feel big. Real strength, true power lies in choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. In lifting people up instead of tearing them down. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. This had transcended entertainment and become something profound, a moral lesson delivered in real time, with real consequences. So, when you mock my mother, Dean continued, his voice still calm, still measured, still devastatingly effective, you're actually demonstrating exactly what she tried to teach me. You're showing everyone here that you require the insult of a deceased woman to feel powerful. You need to ridicule someone's mother to command attention. And friend, that doesn't project strength, that projects desperation. Big Tony's face had transformed from smug to crimson. His crew had stopped laughing entirely. People at surrounding tables stared at him with expressions mixing pity, disgust, and something close to second-hand embarrassment. Now, you suggested my mother should have taught me how Vegas really functions, Dean pressed forward. Allow me to explain how Vegas actually works. Yes, money flows through this city like water. Yes, power determines who rises and who falls. But you know what makes this entire operation possible. The dealers spending hours on their feet. The waitresses serving drinks with smiles despite aching legs. The janitors cleaning up after people who don't even see them. The performers giving their hearts on stage night after night. Vegas runs on the backs of people showing up with dignity, doing their jobs with pride, even when folks like you treat them as if they're nothing. Dean took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and his audience. My mother grasped something you clearly haven't figured out yet. Power divorced from character is just bullying with better clothes. Money without decency is greed dressed up as success. And making jokes about someone's dead mother doesn't make you clever, funny, or powerful. It makes you small. The silence was so complete that the building's air conditioning seemed deafening. Dean had just publicly, thoroughly, and devastatingly called out a mobster without raising his voice, without profanity, without physical threats. He'd simply held up a mirror and forced Big Tony to see his own reflection. Here's what happens next, Dean said. I'm going to finish this show. I'm going to honor my mother's memory by treating everyone in this room, including you, with the respect and dignity she taught me to show all people, even when they don't deserve it, even when they've disrespected her, because that's what genuine strength looks like. That's what real class demonstrates. And that's how Vegas truly works when you understand what actually matters. He turned to his band. Let's lighten the mood. How about That's Amore? The music began. Dean sang, and Big Tony sat there, visibly rattled, as every eye in the room bore into him. He'd entered this showroom to assert dominance, to remind everyone of his importance, to put Dean Martin in his proper place. Instead, he'd been revealed as exactly what he was, a bully who needed to hurt others to feel significant. After the performance ended, Dean retreated to his dressing room, removing his tie and wiping the stage makeup from his face. A knock interrupted his routine. One of Big Tony's men stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Mr. Martin, Big Tony requests a word. He's waiting outside. Dean's manager looked like he might faint. Dean, absolutely not. Let me contact security. Let me call someone who can. It's fine, Dean said calmly. I'll speak with him. He walked through the backstage area, through the service corridors, out into the parking lot where desert air provided relief from the showroom's heat. Big Tony leaned against a gleaming Cadillac, cigarette smoke curling around his face. His associates maintained a respectful distance. Big Tony studied Dean for what felt like an eternity, then spoke. You made me look like a complete fool in there. You made yourself look like a fool, Dean replied evenly. I simply pointed it out. Big Tony took a long drag from his cigarette. You realize I could destroy you in this town. I could ensure you never work Vegas again. I have that kind of influence. I know, Dean acknowledged. You could probably end my career here. You possess that power. Then why? Big Tony's voice carried genuine confusion. Why risk everything to defend some dead woman's honor? Dean considered the question carefully. Because certain things matter more than career advancement, some things matter more than money or success or personal safety. My mother sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never dreamed of having. The absolute least I can do is defend her memory when someone disrespects it. Big Tony was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ember of his cigarette. My mother died when I was 12, he finally said. She was a good woman, better than I turned out to be. He looked at Dean. What you said in there about how people treat others when they have power. My mother used to say similar things. I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten a lot of what she tried to teach me. It's never too late to remember, Dean said quietly. Big Tony's laugh was bitter. Yeah, it is. I'm too far gone. I've done too many things, crossed too many lines. He flicked the cigarette away, watching it spark against the asphalt. But you're legitimate. You stood on that stage and spoke truth to my face without being disrespectful. You defended your mother without attacking mine. You made me look small without humiliating me in a way I couldn't come back from. He paused. That takes more courage than pulling a trigger. That's genuine strength. It's just who I am, Dean said. No, Big Tony corrected. It's who your mother raised you to be, and she did an exceptional job. He extended his hand. We're square, you and me. You won't have problems from me or anyone associated with me in this town. You have my word. Dean shook his hand. Thank you. And Dean, Big Tony added, what you said about real power being about building people up instead of tearing them down, I'm going to try to remember that. Can't promise I'll transform into a person, but I'll remember. The story of that November night spread through Las Vegas faster than wildfire, through dry brush, not the sensationalized version where Dean destroyed a mobster or engaged in physical confrontation, the real version, the one where Dean Martin stood on stage and calmly, eloquently defended his mother's memory by explaining what authentic strength looked like. The version where he made a powerful, dangerous man look small, not through violence or threats, but through simple, devastating truth. Other entertainers heard the story and found inspiration. If Dean Martin could stand up to a mobster without losing his composure, without abandoning his values, maybe they could stand up to the bullies in their own lives. It became a defining moment, not just for Dean's career, but for how performers understood themselves in relation to the mob power structure controlling Vegas. A decade later, in 1965, Dean participated in a magazine interview. The journalist asked about the incident with Big Tony, a story that had become legend, despite Dean never speaking about it publicly. What made you respond that way? The interviewer asked. Most people would have either ignored it or exploded with anger. You did neither. Dean reflected on the question. When someone insults your mother, your immediate instinct is rage. You want to hurt them back equally, but then I remembered something my mother actually taught me. She said, when someone tries to wound you, ask yourself why. What pain are they experiencing that makes them want to inflict pain on others? And I realized Big Tony wasn't really trying to insult my mother. He was trying to assert dominance, to remind everyone of his power. The insult was merely the tool he chose. So you chose to address the tool rather than react to it. The interviewer said, exactly, Dean replied. I chose to talk about what my mother genuinely taught me, what real power looks like, what true strength is, and in doing that, I showed everyone in that room, including Big Tony, that his method of asserting power was actually weakness. That authentic strength is choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. "Do you think you changed his mind?" the interviewer asked. Dean smiled slightly. "I don't know if I changed his mind, but I think I reminded him of something he once knew, something his own mother probably taught him. And maybe that reminder made a small difference. That's all we can really do, remind people of the better versions of themselves." When Dean Martin passed away in 1995, his daughter Diana discovered a small box among his possessions. Inside lay a photograph of Angela, his mother, and a piece of paper covered in her handwriting, a note she'd written when he was young. Translated from Italian, it read, "Dino, always remember, being strong doesn't mean being hard. Being powerful doesn't mean being cruel. The strongest people are those who choose kindness when meanness would be easier, who choose gentleness when harshness would be simpler. That is true strength. That is what I want you to become." Dean had carried this note his entire life. It had guided his response to Big Tony that night in 1955. It had shaped how he treated people throughout his entire career. It was his mother's final lesson, and he'd honored it every single day. Big Tony Castiano died in 1972. According to people who knew him during his final years, he'd mellowed considerably. He was never a good man. He'd committed too many terrible acts for that transformation. But he'd become less cruel, less needlessly vicious. When asked about the change, he'd tell people, "I heard something once that stayed with me about how treating people badly when you have power over them is just weakness, pretending to be strength. Took me too long to understand it, but I understand it now." He never mentioned Dean Martin by name, but those who knew the story understood. One night in 1955, a singer stood on a stage and held up a mirror to a mobster, and somehow, against all odds, the mobster actually looked into it and saw himself clearly. The story of the night a mafia boss made a joke about Dean Martin's mother isn't really about the insult itself. It's about the response. It's about a man who could have reacted with fury, who could have escalated toward violence, who could have let ego and pride dictate his actions. But instead, he chose calm. He chose philosophy. He chose to speak truth rather than threats. And in doing so, he didn't just defend his mother's honor. He demonstrated exactly what she'd taught him, that true power isn't about dominating others. True power is about having the strength to remain composed, the wisdom to speak truth, and the courage to choose kindness even when cruelty would be easier and potentially more satisfying. That's the lesson Angela Crosetti taught her son, and that November night in 1955, Dean Martin proved he'd learned it perfectly. This is why, 70 years later, people still tell this story, because it showed us all that there's a better way forward, that you don't have to meet cruelty with cruelty, that calm, reasoned truth possesses more power than any threat, and that defending the people you love doesn't require violence. It requires only the courage to speak from the heart about what genuinely matters. Dean Martin's mother taught him how Vegas really works, not the surface version where power and money rule everything, but the deeper truth that dignity, respect, and character matter more than any of it. And on that November night, in front of a packed showroom and one very dangerous man, Dean proved she was absolutely right. That's not just courage, that's transformation, that's hope. That's the power of speaking truth with calm strength instead of angry violence. And that's a lesson worth remembering, worth sharing, worth living by. Tomorrow, and for every generation that follows.